Waiting for the spinning ball to stop spinning. I hope that means this is not recording, but if it is, howdy. I've discovered that I can't always trust the spinning ball. There we go. Okay, I think everybody's on board now. I'm doing a painting, a wedding painting. It's kind of a nice treat. As many of you know, I do wedding paintings usually live at the reception and finish. This is a wedding that actually took place 5 years ago. I have distant familial connections to the bride in this painting. And I'm going to be working primarily from, let me get my camera out of the way. I'm going to be working primarily from this sketch that I did yesterday and emailed to my client, and she approved it. So that's what I'm going to be referencing mostly. Now let me show you a little bit where I got that sketch from. Again, my client, Leslie. Hi, Leslie, if you watch this, hope you're going to see it. She and her husband, RJ, sent a number of photographs from their wedding, nice details, pretty much everything I could need. And where's the main photograph? Here it is. This is the main picture I'm going to be working from. The biggest difference between this and this is I've scrunched down the architecture so that we'll actually be able to see this beautiful rose window and some of the ceiling and so on and so forth in the painting. So for painting the bride and the groom, I'm going by this, and I have two things to help me. One is I've blown up that photograph and laminated it, so it's nice and sharp and crisp. The other thing is, and I'll go into this in more depth when I get to this point, I am going to cheat. I am going to use a grid to get the bride and groom on there. Now, I use the word cheating, and I stick by that word. Don't tell me in the comments it's not cheating. Here's my definition. Okay, cheating is any measurement, tracing, projecting, any device, any mechanical device whatsoever used to get the image on the canvas. Now, all cheating is legal, so that's what you need to hear me say. All cheating is legal. In fact, I was reading last night. I actually did some work without you watching. I know that's hard to believe. I know I left you out. I just did it all by myself. I was actually going through some of my Andrew Loomis, Loomis, Andrew Loomis. Google him. I was going through his book and just doing some of the discipline of learning how to draw. And in the introductory pages, he said, basically, if your livelihood depends on nailing down a likeness quickly, do whatever you need to do to get the job done. That's what he said. But if you want a sense of accomplishment, so he basically agrees with me. All cheating is legal. You just have to remember that every time you cheat, like I'm going to do in a little while with that grid method, every time you cheat, your skills deteriorate slightly. So I hope that, like me, I hope that gives you pause. But I'll describe more about that, how I got that, why it's that size, and so on later. Right now, let's just start doing a painting. It's a very warm. Again, here's the photograph. Gives me some colors. In fact, I think I should probably tape this up over here. So I'll use two things to go by. One is the sketch that I've done right over there, and the other is I'll have this photograph, which will also give me colors and so forth. All right, now as you know, I'm not going to start out by beginning to draw that image. I want this slightly higher, I think. I like generally to have my nose right in the middle of the canvas, but that only works if you can still reach the top of the canvas, because you don't want to be stretching too far either. So I'm not going to draw that image. I'm going to draw a counterpoint to that image, but this is a portrait and a wedding painting, so I'm not going to do a wild and crazy counterpoint as I usually do. I'm just going to keep it a little bit on the conservative side, which means, whoops, not that conservative. Does that ever happen to you? You think something, this or that, or something's going to come off, on your brushes. You think the brushes are going to make one kind of mark, and then you start painting and they make a very different mark than you thought. I hope you feel that, because sometimes, because that means you're You're actually painting. You're not just constructing. Now, is that good enough? I'm going to do one more, which is very actually part of the architecture of the church. Maybe just a little tiny bit more down here, echoing that curve. All right. That's weird, isn't it? Well, if you're used to watching me, you know that's not weird. But for all those of you who are new, understand the image I'm painting is that. That's my sketch that I did yesterday for this client. That's what I'm painting. That's the scene I'm painting. And yet I start out with this image. What gives? Well, again, I use this as a mental trick with myself to make sure I understand that I am painting a painting, not painting a picture. And that's all I'm going to say about that right now. I repeat these things so many times, I fear you get tired of hearing it. Now, I'm going to start. I want that to dry, but I don't want to wait for it to dry. So I'm going to start drawing. And you can draw, you and I, we can draw in any color we want, any colors we want are legal. And it's very intuitive. I find myself I think in a rather red outline kind of mood. Very subjective. Why did I pick red? Well, because it's a fairly warm subject matter, right? And I want something darker than this orange. So there you go. A little darker than orange is red. So you could say that's the reason I started with red. Now, I want to try to get this right here. I don't get these two triangles as even as I can get. Without measuring. Although I reserve the right to measure if I so choose. If I find I'm not doing a good job eyeballing it. Generally speaking, I think you want to eyeball stuff. How big is this rose window? I think it's about that big. Let me step back and take a look at that. No, I think it might be slightly smaller than that. So here's a little trick. I just added some purple to my brush so that the purple is darker than the red. Did you see that? I'm barely in your shot, aren't I? Let me move up there just for a minute. So the purple is darker than the red. Therefore, our eye sees the purple line and kind of ignores, in a way, the lighter red line. So that's just a little trick. I used to do a ton of that in my acrylic underpainting. I do less of it than I used to, just as I've progressed as an artist. Now, here's one of the things I'm going to pick up every once in a while. Wow. The architecture. I'm not going to draw a whole lot of attention to the corners of the painting. I do not want those to be major elements, but I do want them to be accurate. So I'm just taking hopefully just enough time to get them accurate, and I'll worry about how far back to push them later in the painting process. Okay, now. Certainly am drawing at the moment with very confident marks, aren't I? Um, I want to tell you that I'm not as confident as these lines look, and perhaps I should be making the lines appear more tenuous than I am. So let me come back and kind of mess these up a little bit so that I'm not quite so tempted to lean on them, to trust them, to rely on them. Okay? Let's make this easel go up a little bit. Yeah, I have one of these crazy electric easels, and kind of thing I never thought I would ever use or need, but I find myself actually using it. Let me check my size. Yeah, I think I'm okay. Now I am going to paint in these figures in acrylics. Initially, I'm going to paint them in very loosely, and not using the grid. So I want to get their approximate position correct first, and then I'll worry about coming back and getting their exact position right later. Bride's train actually goes off the bottom and off the right of the canvas. Hope that's all right, Leslie. I think it puts you and RJ right there in the right spot. I am saying your husband's name right, aren't I? It is RJ. Yeah. Okay. Just had to check. Okay. More architecture. There's a horizontal line. I certainly don't want it hitting the top of the groom's head, right? So let's get that in there. Then, I'm standing back now. This is my reference, my go by, some people call it, for obvious reasons. That's what I'm going by. But once the painting starts to take on a life of its own on the canvas, of course that becomes secondary. I look at the canvas and say, is that a pleasant composition? I think that it is. Let me go on making a few more marks and see if I like. So if by any chance any of you know of someone who's been married and they didn't know about me when they got married, or you didn't know about me and you might like me to do a painting of your wedding, this is what it looks like. This is how it works. I'd be delighted to do. I charge just a little bit less for this than I do for live painting. I think for obvious reasons. A lot less pressure. Yeah, I think that's all right. Again, I'm looking at the composition. Of course, I reserve the right to move things around. I want to try to fit this cross in here because it's a nice little element. I think that'll do. It's smaller than in real life, smaller than in the photograph. in a sense, breaking one of the laws of composition on purpose. Normally you would put your focal point left or right and so forth. But this is one of those compositions, a portrait-like composition, that I don't think that rule is the best one. It actually is often a good idea in portrait to put your figures front and center. At least it's one option. So that's what I've done here. They're virtually dead center, slightly off, just a little bit to the right. And I think that's a good decision. Okay, I'm going to pause here and let this dry for just a second, and I'll be back in a minute. Thanks so much, you guys, for watching. Oh, if has anybody made any comments here? I haven't seen any. I hope to catch them if you do. Thanks. All right, welcome back. This is all dry now, and I'm ready to begin my second layer. Thank you, Marloes Oosterhoff. Very good. Are you from the Netherlands? Very good. Thank you for joining me. Okay, next layer. I'm trying to get some warm yellow on my brushes. I'm so used to doing this, I suppose it's not shocking to me anymore, but I do sometimes try to remember, oh, what's it like for people who have never watched me paint before? This must be mildly bizarre. This is the subject, again, this is the subject matter, and here's a photograph that I'm working from. You can barely see out of frame there, and this is what it looks like so far. Here's some descriptions of my painting process. I want to create enough chaos in the underpainting process that I have lots to respond to in the overpainting process. And for me, it's about 8, 10, or 12 layers of underpainting and 1 or 2 layers of overpainting. Okay, now this has to be dry before I proceed, and usually I hang up on you guys before I start drawing stuff, but I don't have time. This is a heat gun, not a hair dryer. I like a heat gun for 2 reasons. By the way, it says here that the air coming out is 400 degrees. It sounds a little high to me, but you can certainly catch things on fire or burn them. You can certainly cook them if you hold it in place too long. But I like it better than a hairdryer because it's faster and it's quieter. And I've gotten to the stage of life that I value my hearing very highly, what's left of it. And so I don't like working in the presence of loud noises any more than I have to. So forgive me for while I take just a minute to dry this. You might be asking, why does it need to be dry? I'm painting in layers of transparent. These are transparent acrylics, very much like watercolors, but they're acrylics with a lot of medium and, of course, as you saw, very wet brushes. So it's transparent, and as soon as this dries, I'm going to slap another layer of transparent acrylic on top of this one. And the fact is that several layers of acrylic, different colors, is not the same as mixing all those colors up over here on the, somewhere over here, and then doing it in one layer. That's not the same effect at all. So I very definitely want the effect of various layers of color. Let me give you another description of my painting process, especially for those of you who might be new watching me. Years ago, I discovered, well, Bob Ross's best comment, happy little accidents. Years ago, I discovered that the best painting, in fact, the best painting happens when you're not trying, when you're doing something else, when you're trying to do something else. When something accidental happens on the canvas, That's when the best painting happens. That really sunk down deep into my mind and psyche. And I thought, well, good grief, if the best painting happens while you're doing something else, always do something else. If you follow my strange logic. If the best painting happens when you're spontaneously doing something that appears unplanned, then why don't you paint that way all the time? So in fact, that is exactly what I do. I paint that way all the time. Now, here's a little trick. Not everything here is completely dry, but I've got a wet brush right here, and I'm just, whatever's not dry at this point, I am just wiping off. And by the way, when you do that, sometimes you get some really interesting little effects. Like, let me zoom in. It happened one time on this canvas, and it's right here, and I'm going to pick you up and give you a ride. Hang on tight. Do you see this drip right here? Right there? That's where there was wet paint there, and I wiped it off, which leaves a light mark. But it's a very interesting and fascinating, dare I say, is that the right word? Very fascinating light mark. I'm trying to get you back where you were. Close enough. Okay. So now, at least in just a second, everything on the canvas will be dry. And I can go ahead and do the next layer. Because the water that I just put on there is very thin and it dries very quickly. Okay, good enough. Now, again, I'm aiming for essentially a brown, hi Toby, aiming for essentially a brown wall. Here's the photograph. But I don't want to, of course, I could just mix up a batch of brown acrylic and slather it on there, but it wouldn't be very interesting. So I'm trying to achieve brownness. Can I say that? I'm trying to achieve a brown effect without using brown. I can use brown if I want to. I've got it right here, but that's not my first choice. Okay, so I'm going to do now some ultramarine blue, which, since there's a lot of yellow up there, when I do blue on is it going to turn green? Well, yes, sort of, but not a simple green. It's a complex green because it's made up of several layers. Now, part of the reason I'm doing blue is because these little bits of the ceiling at the upper left and upper right are in fact blue. The ceiling is blue, so that's part of the reason why I'm doing blue up there. There's the groom's tux, and here's the shadows in the alcove back there. Now, having made my canvas go down, I can make it go back up again. All this blue down here, all that does is satisfy the need for some dark stuff down there. Okay, very soon here, I need some more blue in the bride's veil. That was the bride's veil. Do you notice that? Vroom, vroom, bride's veil. That's a concept that my students have a hard time really getting used to. You don't paint the thing, you paint in the general zone, the general area of the object you're painting. Okay. Oh, wait, let me do just a little bit of picking up a small brush now. And let's do a little bit up here. This rose window. I think that's called a rose window. Is that right? In the traditional, this is a very simple modern rose window compared to the, of course, medieval cathedrals, but I think that's what it's called. Very soon here I'm going to do my first layer of white. Yeah, I'm going to do it next. So, do you mind watching me one more time while I dry this blue stuff? Again, this is pretty boring live video right here. Literally, let's sit and watch the paint dry. Although here, let me pick you up again, and I think hope you can hear me or over the noise of the there. Do you see that those layers of color in the upper left corner? That's just one example. There's red, orange, and blue. Basically just 3 layers so far piled on top of each other. Let's come down a little bit. Do you see this area right here? Look how fascinating that is. Fascinating texture, fascinating color, fascinating patina. It's same as texture perhaps, but slightly different connotation. And we have that happening all over the canvas. That's why I do layers of transparent color. Our eyes, your eyes, and I think you don't know if you know this about yourself, your eyes are gaga over transparent colors. Yes, they are. You might not know it, but if you're an artist, you better know that. All human eyes are drawn to the physical complexity of transparent colors. Here's an illustration I use often. If you're sitting at a stoplight and you can look to your left and to your right, and on one side of you is a dump truck, or a brand new dump truck now, or a school bus painted yellow. Let's say school bus painted yellow. But on the other side is a Rolls Royce painted yellow. I don't know if there's such a thing as a yellow Rolls Royce, but for the sake of analogy, let's pretend there is. The yellow school bus was painted as cheaply as possible so as not to waste the school department's, the education department's money, right? So they used basically 1 layer of opaque yellow paint. Shiny, but opaque. 1 layer, essentially. I might be exaggerating slightly, but only slightly. On the Rolls-Royce, on the other hand, I happen to know that every Rolls-Royce has 97 pounds of paint on its body. Did you hear that? Every Rolls-Royce has 97, almost 100 pounds of paint are used to paint a Rolls-Royce. How can there be 100 pounds? Because it's layer after layer after layer after layer of what? 2 things, translucent and transparent paint. So gazing into the paint job of a Rolls-Royce is like getting lost in a pearlescent depth and so on. It's very complicated in the physics realm. The school bus is a 1 bounce color. Light hits the yellow, bounces to your eye. The Rolls Royce is a multi bounce, transfusion, iridescence, double bounce, coming back, and so on and so forth. I have a formula for it that's not coming to mind right now, so I'm not going to try to restate it. But trust me, your eyes like. You would not buy a Rolls Royce if it had a school bus paint job. Likewise, a 5-year-old kid walking down the beach, he sees 2 shells. One is a plain old, I say plain, I shouldn't prejudice you. It's an opaque shell, no matter what color it is, gray, white, black, brown, pale, opaque. Next to it is a translucent or even a transparent shell or a piece of sea glass. The 5-year-old's hand goes to which one? The answer is given all things being equal, most of the time the 5-year-old will reach for the transparent or translucent thing, a piece of material, because his eyes are drawn to that. So our eyes, all human eyes, given the choice, the human eye would rather see more, not less. And hang on just a second. By the way, here's a cheap old brush with a loose ferrule, right? So how did it get loose? Oh, easy. It got left in the water too long. That's all. It got left in water and the wood expanded and stretched the ferrule. I talk about that fairly occasionally. That's why you don't want to leave your brushes in the water. Okay, now let's do some white. So this is my first layer of white. It will not be my last layer of white today. I'm quite sure of that. So here's the bride. for those of you who missed it earlier, I'll get into this later, but I actually have the bride and the groom rendered with a grid. I will use a grid later on my painting, but in the early stages, I want to paint freely, so I'm not using a grid now. Do that as a boutonniere. Again. By the way, one of the things I like about painting with two hands is that when you paint with two hands, your brain can't quite keep up with if two hands are moving quickly. So if you put your brushes on the canvas and make them go quickly, your brain, your control freak brain loses control. And that's a good thing, because it's your control freak brain that is causing most of you, not all of you, but most of you, most of your grief, right? You're tight and you want to be loose, right? I have that same history as you. I was a tight artist. You can go to my website. In fact, sometimes I still enjoy doing tight just for fun. I really do. But I don't think it's my best art. I think my best art is this kind of stuff. But when you paint with two hands, your brain can't keep up, so you're more likely to paint freely and loosely and make interesting marks, because your brain can't quite keep up with both hands. It can keep up with one hand, can't keep up with two. The best painting happens when you're trying hard to do something else, or happy little accidents. So years ago I said, well then, shoot. If the best painting happens, okay, what did my why did my easel stop working? Now it's working. Okay. I paint with my left hand because I have one. There's a smart aleck answer. I paint with my left hand because I tend to paint better. Not in greater control. Don't misunderstand me. I don't mean I have more control with my left hand. Quite the opposite. I have less control with my left hand. Therefore, I tend to paint a little bit better because I have less control. Again, those of you who want to get loose, there you go. Here's Dan Nelson's 4 steps for getting loose. Ready? 4 steps. Number 1, use a bigger brush. Number 2, and you saw the brushes I started this painting with. I'll use them again. That's a big brush. Unless you're doing an 8 by 10 foot painting, and it's not a big brush. Use a big brush, use both hands, take off your glasses, and turn off the lights. Most of you say you want to be loose because you know you're supposed to say you want to be loose. I'm being a little bit mean here. Everybody tells you you're supposed to be loose, some of you, but you don't really want to be loose. You just say you do. If I can convince you eventually, keep watching me, if I can convince you that loose is better, then perhaps you'll start painting loose. Until then, yeah, you're just saying that. Because you can get loose. Here it is. You want to hear it again? You can get loose. It's real easy. Big brush, wrong hand, glasses off, lights off, and you will paint loose. And everybody's saying, I don't want to paint that loose. Bingo. Okay, so start that loose and then back off. Start that loose and then little by little back off a little bit till you get to just the right degree of looseness. Oh my. Man, he's mean. He's so mean. Trying to make you a better painter. I'm going to have fun in just a minute. By the way, one of the things I like about my painting process is that I like every stage, every phase that I come to. I go, oh, I'm excited about it. Like, oh boy, next layer, I get to do this or that or thus and so. Makes me happy. So next layer, let me clean these brushes really quickly. And I don't think I have to wait too long for this to dry. Well, I have to wait for it to dry, but not too long. So forgive me again. I'm gonna let's all sit and watch paint dry together, shall we? So the next layer is going to be color on top of this white. And then I'll do white again. Maybe colors on top of this white. And then I'll do white again on top of that. So layer, layer, layer. Now what I just did, even though I call it opaque white, it, of course, as you can see, it's actually not opaque at all. It's very, very much in the translucent category. Not opaque, but it's opaque paint applied very thinly, which is translucent. And I still find people who, I think it's a linguistic thing, they have a hard time remembering the difference between transparent and translucent. So that's all I'm going to say. I'll let you figure it out. There's a difference. Transparent, think about it. Translucent, there you go. You just have to pause for a second and go, oh yeah, I do know the difference. And I use all three of those very consciously. Now, let me show you again what I'm aiming for. There's my sketch, and here's the photograph. And the colors are, you know, close enough between those two that gives me a general target. So it's really very brown, isn't it? I want this to be brownish by the time I finish. Now, I've got a long ways to go before I finish. Let me put the camera there so it'll adjust. There we go. After finishing layers of acrylic, I do a glaze of oil, and the oil glaze could be brown. So I don't need to keep doing acrylic till it's brown, because I got oils go on top of this. I think it's time, however, for some black pencils. Okay, so here we go. Again, I know some of you are hearing me all the time, so forgive me for the repetition, but we might have new people on board. It is very unusual to use colored pencils, black pencils in an oil painting. The pencils I'm using now do not, I repeat, they do not correspond to what old traditional oil painters used to do when they did a charcoal sketch under their oil painting. You'll notice I'm doing my line drawing quite late in the process as opposed to doing it first. I've been painting already for several minutes before I break out these pencils. Part of the reason is, I want these lines to show in the final painting. A traditional oil painter, when he or she does a pencil sketch, charcoal sketch, they do not want that charcoal sketch to be visible in the final work. But I do want my charcoal sketch to be visible in the final work. There's way too much information in that. But of course, I'm going to try to copy it all. Just a little bit of it. So why do I use pencil? The main reason is because I like listen to this, I like the juxtaposition. What a good word. I like the combination. I could also say I like the combination, but juxtaposition is actually more accurate. I like the combination of smooshy paints and scratchy pencil. That's the main reason. It gives me an added interesting texture to the painting. I stumbled on this about 2.5 years ago when I did one summer I did a couple hundred abstracts that summer of 2015, I think it was, and had a great time. I still do. I love doing abstracts. Unlike many of my fellow realists, I think abstract painting is wonderful. The art that I don't like is preachy art. I'll not get off on that today. So I was doing a whole bunch of abstract paintings, and of course, when you do abstracts, it's like there are fewer rules. You're freer to do whatever you feel like doing. So I started using these pencils. They're essentially sort of a grease pencil. A grease pencil would work fine. And I found that I liked the effect so much that when I came back to my regular representational paintings, I said, oh, maybe I should stick with this pencil thing. So I have, and I may grow out of it someday. I might decide it's a stupid idea and I should stop, but it's been 2.5 years and I haven't grown out of it yet. I find myself quite liking the... What was that? That was my hands having a seizure. I give my hands permission to have a little seizure without my permission, especially if I've been painting too fastidiously. That's my favorite word for this. That kind of painting. I've been painting too carefully for too long, drawing in this case. Then I give my hands permission to just go do their own thing. Again, sort of like that. If I make marks doing that I don't like, then in the final stage layer of the painting, I will cover up some of those marks. What amazes me is how often I do like the way those things look. Okay, let me do a quick, see if I'm close. I'm surprisingly close. Good, I like it. I will use that grid in a little while when I begin to do the bride and groom very carefully. This painting will encompass a the portrait of the bride and groom. Now they have a picture of the table here. Here it is. Okay. So once again, 2 big candelabras, brass. Most of this is hidden by the bride and groom, but the candelabras are not. Yeah, I think they should go right about here. And they're right height, about this tall. Okay. Okay, and candle. There we go. Candle. Candelabra. Nope, that's wrong. Over here, I've got the table ending there. So let's move this over to about here. Okay. Table ending about there. A little bit of flower down there. A little bit of tablecloth. Hands, reflections. All right, good enough. I'll do more pencil later on. Now, let's go back. Since the last thing I did was light, the dance of painting would suggest that the last thing I did was small and dark, but the thing before that was large and light. Large and dark is the next natural thing. Now, I think I'm going to actually go back to my very first color, which is orange, with a little bit of yellow in it. Yellow-orange. Now here's where some of you have told me that your brush picks up the pencil and smears it. And indeed it does. Absolutely it does. So you just need to, don't rub this. Like right here, there's that picked up. Let me zoom in here so you can see a little bit better. Do you see how it picked up this gray stuff right there? It did indeed. So I'm not going to take my brush and go back over that. It'll just make it pick up even more, which I don't want it to do. So I just don't rub it much. Now let's do some red down here. And when you're painting in transparent colors, there's no such thing as transparent red. It's transparent magenta. Red is not pretty when it goes transparent. It's not pretty at all. It goes to kind of a sickly, chalky, bubblegum pink. Have you ever noticed, if you know anything about 4-color printing process, in 4-color printing, the 4 colors are black, magenta, not red. Magenta is not technically in the color wheel, that's funny, but it's a magenta is a purplish pink red, reddish purplish pink. You know what magenta looks like. In oil painting, my favorite magenta is permanent rose. Let's do some of this red up here too. I first learned that principle from when I studied Maxfield Parrish many years ago. He was my number one muse, my number one imitate go-to guy for many years as an illustrator. Okay, that's good. And I think I need to take a little break right now. Oh, sorry, I did a bunch of stuff without you looking. Sorry. Nice, a lot of nice texture happening with that last layer. I'm going to dry this and be back in just a few minutes for you to watch. All right, welcome back. Thanks for watching this. Okay. Hello, friend from Morocco. Thank you so much. Let me tell you what's going on here. My client sent me several photographs, one of which, they emailed them to me, one of which was this. In my computer, I made this size. How did I know how big to make the image? Now, I'm not going to go into great depth, but I do want to explain this for those of you who are interested. First of all, this is my go-by. This is the right ratio. This 24 by 36 or 2 by 3. This is 2 by 3. I made sure of that when I did this sketch. And this is how large I made the bride and groom in this sketch. Now, you can imagine if I took a ruler and said, okay, this is about 9 inches tall. 9 equals 36. Okay, so 4 times. That means the bride and groom are about 4 inches tall. 4 times 4, they should be 16 inches. Now, it turns out the measurements I just gave you aren't exactly right on. Let me show you a tool. I'll probably give you a tour of this tool more carefully some other day. They're the same thing, just a big one and a little one, plastic and paper. This is called a proportional scale. This is a tool from back in the olden days in the graphic arts industry, but they still sell them, and I find it a very handy tool. This is an analog proportional scale. Now, everything I'm about to tell you, you can do on your phone with a calculator, but for me, it's a whole lot more complicated with a calculator. First of all, how much is 1.17 inches, for instance? You tell me. I don't know. So you'd have to calculate, because your ruler doesn't go in tenths, it goes in eighths. So anyway, this is a proportional calculator, and I used it. I'm not going to describe how to use it other than you line up this number and that number, and then if these numbers line up over here, then the new number lines up over here. So that's, and real quickly, you can Google proportional scale and probably find someone on YouTube just showing you very carefully how to make it. That showed me how big to make this figure. Now, in my phone, by the way, not on my computer, but in my phone, I have an app that puts a grid on things. Now, you'll notice, you won't notice, I'll tell you, that it just so happens, by accident, imagine this, that this groom is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 squares tall. Who'd have thunk? So I adjusted the square so that he's 8. The bride is about 7.5 in a little bit. And you'll notice most people know about grids. You know how to do a grid, right? What many people don't know is how to do a double grid. One grid is one color, another grid is another color. Now, I've learned how to do all this on my phone on an app called Artist's Grid Tool. I'll try to remember to put an image of that on my YouTube community so you can see it, or maybe I'll put it on my Facebook.com/Danny Artman. So a double grid is much more helpful, because if you've ever tried to grid, you've discovered how easy it is to get messed up and you can't remember where you are. So the 2 different colors helps that a great deal. Okay, so here's what I've got to do then. I'm going to put a grid on my painting. Yes, sirree, I'm going to draw lines with colored pencils, not red and white, but red and blue. And I'll just remember, white here equals blue here. That's real easy. I've done this many times before. So all I have to do basically is two things: determine where I want the groom's head, and as a matter of fact, I like where I've got it. So I'm making a mark right here. Oh, and these are watercolor pencils. So I can wash off all these lines with a damp rag, which I will do as I proceed. The other thing I need to know is, so how big is this grid? And the answer is pretty close, 1 7/8. 1 7/8 and a third of a 16th. Are you with me? So let me check it this way. How big is it this way? 1 7/8 and just a tiny bit. Okay, so here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to do when I draw my lines in a minute, I'm going to do 1 15/16 this way. So I've already drawn the starting line right there. So 1 15/16 there. There. I'm going to hang up on you shortly because you don't need to watch me do all this. I just want to explain what I'm doing, and then I'll do it without you. When you come back in a few minutes, I'll have this entire grid, white lines in blue, red lines in red, and it will all be ready to go. And after that, it's pretty much just a matter of doing what you all know how to do. By the way, someday, if you're an artist, I'm not going to get this complicated here, but if you're an artist, you need to know how to do super grids. If you're going to cheat good, okay? And super grids are when you label these line 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, and you do angles like from here to here. Gives me a real helpful line right through the bride and groom's face. Let me zoom in so you can see what I just did. You see? And then you transfer these kind of lines onto your new working surface. But I'm not going to mess with that for this job here, but someday maybe when I'm teaching you how to use a grid. Like I said, if you're going to cheat, man, I want you to cheat with a high degree of skill. And a super grid, it has, after you get all the squares down, you come back and do diagonals. So you can pinpoint where an object goes in your drawing or your painting. Okay, but that's for another day. Let me hang up on you now because, for goodness sakes, you do not need to watch me do this. Oh, it will show you. Okay, just a quick, again, I've got a T-square here. So I'll draw a few lines while you're watching me. And again, this is watercolor pencil. So I can wash it all off by stages as I find myself finishing, not needing the lines anymore. And I lost one line, so let me redraw it right there. Okay, and then I'll do the same thing using my T-square and vertical to get the vertical lines. Okay, so I'll be back in a few minutes. Thanks for watching, and leave comments, by all means, your questions in your comment section. I'll try to catch your chats whenever I can, but I can't always see them because my eyes. Hello, welcome back. So I have finished my grid. Let me zoom in here so perhaps you can see it. Red and blue. I've discovered that a two-color grid, here it's red and white, here it's red and blue. A two-color grid is so helpful because it's so easy. If any of you have ever tried to use a grid, you've no doubt learned how easy it is to screw up. Okay, and I'm going to, all that talk about how look at this grid. Look at that. You will hardly ever see me hold a pencil or a brush in this manner. Again, this is, in fact, yes, yea verily, the death control grip. Because this is the right time for the death control grip. And I'm going to, by the way, all this technique, here today I'm painting in the relaxed comfort of my studio. Most of you probably know, if you have followed me for any length of time at all, that I do most of my wedding paintings. I do live, um, live and in person, live in front of the guests, the wedding guests, at at a reception, and I have to be done, of course, by whenever the reception ends. 99% of the time, make that. I make that goal. So these are the tricks I've learned: the grid, the two-color grid, watercolor pencils, and then coming back and drawing with these black pencils. All of these things are tricks of the trade that I've learned under the pressure of having to finish what is essentially 2 portraits within the time frame of a wedding reception. So yeah, these are all things I've learned the hard way. And here I am, though, in the comfort of my studio, doing it the hard way. You know what? I'm going to do something. A little while ago, I pointed out to you guys for just a second this notion. Excuse me while I walk over here and get my ruler again that I put on its way to my upstairs studio. I described to you briefly the notion of a super grid, and I said I would show you some other time. Well, you know what? I'm actually going to show you right now. So I'm going to draw a diagonal line. Can you see that diagonal line right here? I drew in pencil from this vortex down to this one, and it's easy for me to find those two on my painting because it goes from here to down 2 and over 3. 1, 2, 3. So it's from here down 2 and to the left 3. 1, 2, 3. Oh, I didn't draw that line, but I know exactly where it's supposed to go. So I'm going to reproduce this line, this diagonal line, because it turns out I was really enjoying having that extra little bit of specificity there. So while I'm at that, let me do another one. Let's do another one, yeah, from here to here. This is the kind of grid that most people, their high school art teacher, in most cases, did not teach them this. So you don't know how to do a good grid. You just know how to do what I will arrogantly call an elementary school grid. Most of you know how to do that. Very few people have been introduced to this. Now you have, so you've got no excuse. Likewise, this one is just right down the center between these two because it's going to help so much with those two faces. So again, now let's talk about cheating for just a minute. I know I talk about it quite a bit, but here I am deep in the throes of quote unquote cheating. Okay, all cheating is legal. You can do it. You can do it. You can do it. No problem. The only problem is every time you do it, your skills are deteriorating. So why would you do it? Well, the reason is, as I read in Andrew Loomis's book last night, he agrees with me completely. I would like to say that when time is of the essence and you don't have time to mess around drawing by sight, then absolutely, if you're being paid and it's got to be perfect, then you cheat. That's what he said. But if you want to get good at something, if you want to develop some big skills, then you don't cheat. So here's what I do. You cheat when I have to. Now, and I would much rather, believe me, I would much rather have the challenge and the fun of doing these portraits without cheating. It would be more challenging to my brain. I'd be increasing my skill level. Two things. Number one, I have discovered, at least for me, and by the way, I make no claims to be the best portrait painter in the world, by no means. If I were one of those old Chinese guys that paint on the sidewalks of Manhattan, I'd be ashamed of myself to do something like this. But I ain't one of those old Chinese guys. How do they get so good? It's real easy. They started when they were 5 and they do 100 portraits a day. That's an exaggeration. Until they're 97 and a half. And they're freaking freaks of nature. They're the best I've ever seen, by the way. And if you didn't hear that, it's the Chinese. I asked them, you can tell they're Asian. But I walked up and said, okay, what nationality are you guys? And they were Chinese. Manhattan. I'm assuming they're still there. Um, but I am not one of those because I have a life and I am a pretty much a full-time full-time landscape painter, not at all a full-time portrait painter. So I make no bones about being fantastic at portraits. I'm middle and I'm pretty good. Portrait Society of America is not busting down my door anytime soon saying, oh please, oh please, oh please, Mr. Nelson, won't you join? They are not. Got it? Okay, but what I've discovered is that the doing two figures, for me, the problems are not doubled, they're multiplied. Um, uh, so getting one face and figure, all the proportions right, is quite the challenge, in my opinion. Challenge for me. Uh, um, but getting all the proportions right for two people, for me, it's not twice as difficult. It's about 6 times as difficult because I'm accustomed to drawing one person, and I can usually get pretty close. Okay, I'll be real specific. Here's how good I am. I can nail a likeness every time. You can tell who it is. But about 50% of the time, you can tell who it is, but there's something a little wrong with the blank. You name it. Head, ears, eyes, nose, mouth, everything maybe. Okay, so that's how good I am and how good I ain't. You can always tell who I'm trying to draw if you know the person. But and about half the time, I get it, what I call a perfect likeness. The other half of the time, I get a decidedly imperfect likeness. Okay, so I'm just being really honest and telling you how good I am and how good I ain't. So that means that for doing a portrait, a wedding portrait during a reception, I feel like I'm doing pretty good. And I'm being paid pretty good for nailing 2 portraits in this time frame. Okay, that's all. So does it bother me? Does it give me pause? Yeah, because I hate the notion that my skills are deteriorating because I'm cheating. So what do I do about that? Well, what I did last night when you were not watching me is I had out my Andrew Loomis book, and I was drawing figures. I was learning, I was studying, getting better, okay? And the other way, of course, is just to draw figures, draw figures all the time, just from by looking. Whew, okay, that was a long explanation. I invite you to join me in a similar quest. Cheat when you have to, don't when you don't. Okay, and this is pretty boring for you, so I'm going to stop right here. You can see what I'm doing. I'll bring you back in the next step. Next step is I'm going to begin doing details over the whole painting in transparent acrylics. Then after that, so get it, pencil, then I'm going to paint over this in slightly loosely, and then detail drawing in acrylics, and then white, and then I move to oil. Okay, thanks for watching. Well, hello, welcome back. I am now, after doing a drawing in pencil, I'm going to come back and go over the drawing in acrylics, in a sense permanentizing, because the pencil, of course, can rub off. But once I get the acrylic on here and it's dry, it will be fairly impervious to whatever I do on top of it. In between those 2 steps, let me zoom in here again. In between, I took a few minutes and I erased all of the red and blue grid lines, right? And I will tell you, and be really transparent for a minute. I'm always happy when I'm at a wedding reception when I get to the point where I've erased all the grid lines. Because, of course, just like you, I want people to think I did that freehand. I want people to think, golly, he just drew those two people in there perfect without, whatever. Of course, I didn't. I cheated. And I showed you how I cheated. But in spite of my attempts to be authentic and sincere, I'm as phony as the next guy when it comes to wanting to appear like a freaking genius. Right? Oh boy. I'm being overly transparent here. I hope you can handle that. Reminds me of a couple stories. Well, first of all, if you haven't read or heard of or read David Hocking's blockbuster book, early 2000s, David Hocking, artist in England, wrote a book, I forget now what it's called, but the thesis of the book was quite simple. In it, he said, many of the great artists from the Middle Ages and Renaissance, who we thought all for centuries, we have thought that they were just phenomenal draftsmen. Well, it turns out most of them cheated. Most of them used camera obscura or some other photomechanic, no film, but some technical means to render their subjects. And he caused quite the stir in the art world because a whole bunch of people were really upset at their demigods being dethroned in this impious manner. I'm being silly with you, but anyway, David Hocking, if you just Google David Hocking, old masters used camera obscura or something like that. You'll find his book. And again, it caused quite the stir, so much that some people came out and said, no, he's wrong. He's wrong. His research is sketchy, faulty, and so on and so forth. And I've got to tell you, I have not read the whole book. Well, that's not true. I probably read the whole thing because, at Barnes & Noble over several trips into I never bought it. That's terrible for me to admit that, isn't it? But I read through it. And more than that, he gave, I think it was a TED Talk. I'm not sure. It was something like a TED Talk, but I think it was before the days of TED Talk, so I'm not sure. Maybe it was a lecture at Princeton University that I heard many years ago. But if you listen to him defend his thesis and watch the slideshow that he does, his thesis is unreproachable. There's, in my mind, no question that his theory is correct. That many of the great artists through antiquity, I don't mean that in the literal sense of what I don't mean Greek and Roman, but throughout the centuries, many of the great artists used cheating. They cheated. And he proves it quite beyond the shadow of a doubt if you look at his presentation. Okay, so that's one story. Maybe the greats cheated. Oh, by the way, before I leave that topic, though, let me tell you one glaring exception, and this is according to David Hocking, one glaring exception to that. One ridiculous exception to that the greatest artists cheated. And the one exception is Rembrandt, who also managed to create the most accurate. Rembrandt is just, if there was ever a god that came to earth disguised as an artist, it was Rembrandt. So now you know how I really feel. And frankly, the more you learn about Rembrandt, the more convinced you become of this. And by the way, I think now, just recently I read that I found online that David Hocking's favorite drawing in all of history is a little sketch by Rembrandt. So he's quite the Rembrandtophile. 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 I'm trying to make up words here. David Hockey is quite the lover of Rembrandt himself. So, okay, so back to my story. Number one was David Hawking. The many of the greats cheated, quote unquote, cheated. Here's another story. When I first moved to Raleigh, 28, coming up on 29 years ago, though, I very quickly joined an organization here in town called the North Carolina Association of Designers and Illustrators. I went on years later to become the president of that group for a couple of years before I passed on all those responsibilities to some other person. But we were fortunate to have in our group, and he had been the president a couple of times before I arrived. I'm forgetting his name, David. I'm drawing a blank all of a sudden. I'll think of it and remind you and tell you later. But he was the founding president. He was the founder of the Society of Illustrators in New York City, like back in the 50s. Very, very highly respected, well-known illustrator in New York City in the 50s. He was a good friend of mine. In fact, I preached his funeral some years later, many years ago now. A great honor to be there with his family at the time. And he was a personal friend with Norman Rockwell. They were co-artists together. And David tells us the story with great chuckle. He tells us the story of walking into Norman's studio unannounced one time and caught Norman tracing with his camera. You know. Now, frankly, everybody that knows anything about Norman Rockwell knows he cheated, knows he traced. But just like me, when I say I'm happy to get to the point that I can erase all evidence of my cheating off my canvas, I'm happier. Same. Anyway, so evidently Norman Rockwell was quite flustered and hummed and hawed and tried to kick his camera under the table and so on and stuff like that. And David, my friend, they had great fun telling the story for many years after the fact of his good buddy Norman Rockwell and being embarrassed by the fact that he cheated. So, just funny stuff. We are funny creatures, aren't we? And I'm right up there with him. I'm funny myself. I don't mean humorous, I mean odd. In this case, I try to be funny sometimes. I don't try too hard. It gets really weird, but we are funny creatures, so sure, I like people think I'm a freaking genius. In my case, they might be more likely to think I'm a savant. Yeah, he's good, but he's really weird. Okay, so I am, unfortunately today, I have to run off and meet with my bookkeeper, who does her level best to keep me out of prison by keeping all my tax things correct. And so I have to go meet with Kelly right now, which I hate because I'd so much rather stay here and paint. But that's going to have to do it for right now. And then I've got company coming for supper. So I don't know if I'll be back tonight or not. Let me get out here and say goodbye to you. So that's what it looks like so far. So as you can see, I've done some dark drawing right there. I'm going to take these same brushes and do similar drawing. Again, my main go-by is this sketch that I did yesterday. But it's also the sketch and the photograph. Where's the photograph? Here it is. Okay, so these are the main things I'm going by. And I'll do this drawing, wherever lines are needed. Then I'll do another layer of opaque acrylic white. And when I say opaque, it's often it's translucent. Of course, making much of her veil and so on. And then I switch to oils. That'll probably be tomorrow, unless I just find myself so excited that I can't sleep, and I'll come and hit it late tonight. Possible. So I'm going to close off this episode. Thank you guys so much for watching. Please like it. Like me. Pretend you like me. If you haven't already subscribed, please do so. I hope you're finding this helpful and maybe entertaining too. And please pass it on to your artist friends who need help. The ones who don't need help, don't pass it on. Just let them keep going. only, only for the ones who need help, which be all of us. Okay, bye. Hopefully see you tomorrow, maybe later tonight. Bye-bye.